Aquro Cloud Content is a set of easy-to-use tools for managing in-app content without the need for development experience. Once set up, non-developers can easily manage content inside your app right from the Aquro App Manager. In-app content might be a news feed, a product catalog, or really any editable content of your choice. Configuring Aquro content includes a few different steps. First, you'll need to define the data structure by defining a data model. Then, we'll configure a cloud database where we can store the data and also configure what type of editors will be available when editing this data. Lastly, we'll need to configure our app to read data from your cloud database and then display it in the app. In this video, we'll go through all of these steps and create an app that lists news articles managed directly from the Aquro App Manager. To fully understand all of these steps, you'll need to have some basic knowledge of working with data in Aquro, visual coding as a system, and also using the cloud database. If you're unfamiliar with these topics, please watch our videos or check out our knowledge base articles on them first. To start off, let's head over to the Aquro App Studio and create a new data model. I'll call my model News Item Model, and then I'll add fields for image, summary, and body, and finally click Save on the model. With the model configured, I'll head over to Development and find the Cloud Database Backend service. Here, I can create a new cloud collection that I'll call News, and choose that the collection will have our news item model as the data model. Once it has been created, I can select it and then click on the Content Management button. In this view, I can configure how data in the collection should be editable. First, I'll select that the image field should be visible and that this field should use the image editor. Then I can do the same thing for the summary field, but here I'll instead choose text as the editor. As for body, I'll choose the large text editor. When I'm done, I'll just click Save to save the content management settings for this cloud database collection. With this configured, we're now ready to start editing and adding content to our database. However, to make it possible later on to actually list the content from the database in our app, we'll need to set up the correct permissions for this database. To do this, simply click on the collection, select Edit, and change the list permission to everyone. With the permission set, we're ready to start adding content to the database. This is done in the Aquro App Manager, so let's head over to the Cloud area of the App Manager now. Our content management features are found under the Content tab. Here, I can see a list of all of my apps that have content management activated, and I can therefore click on my News app. Now we'll get a list of all the database collections that have content management configured. In this case, we only have one collection, the news collection we recently created, therefore I'm going to go ahead and click on that one. Now, we're looking at the content list for this collection, and you can see that the list is currently empty. To create a news article, I'll go ahead and click on Add New. Now, you'll see an edit window for this new news article. First, we have a name and a status field. Then, we have three fields that we configured earlier for image, summary, and body. As you can see, the three fields have different editors just as we configured when we set up content management. Let's go ahead and fill in some content for this news article. Lastly, I'll change the status to published and save the article. Using the status setting, we can have unpublished drafts that won't be displayed in our app until we change their status to published. With this article published, we're now ready to configure our app to actually view it. We'll do this by jumping back into the App Studio. Before we list our news in our app, we'll need to create a cloud data query that will return a list of all of our published news articles. We can do this by going to the cloud database and then going to the Queries tab. Now, I'll add a new query and set List News as the name and make sure that the query will use the news collection. When created, I'll select the query and click on its Edit button. Now I can specify a filter that will be used when querying our collection from the app. In this case, I just want to apply a filter that makes sure that only published articles are returned. I'll do this by choosing the content status property and setting that this value should be equal to 1. Before saving the query, we can test it out by clicking on the Test button. As you can see, the query now returns one item, our news article that we just created in the App Manager. As I'm happy with this filter, I can just save the query by clicking Save. With all of this configured, we're now ready to list out the content in our app, so I'll head over to the home page. First, I'll create a temporary data collection that will be used to temporarily store the news articles from the cloud before listing them in our app. I'll select the news item model as data model. I'll use private as the scope. I'll set it as temporary and then give it news items as a name. Now, I can add a list view to our page that will be used to list out the news articles. To configure the items property, I'll click on the wand icon. I'll select the newly created news items collection as the data source and give it binding 1 as a name. Finally, I'll need to map the properties from our news items collection to the collection used by the list. When happy with the mapping, I can close the mapping windows by clicking OK. The very last step now is to load the data from our cloud database by using the Cloud Data query. This is done by editing the after loaded script. To load data from the query, I'll use the Cloud Database query coding block. I'll set list news as the query, and I'll map the collection to our news items collection. When the data has been loaded from our database, I'll need to refresh it with the data refresh loaded data block. And finally, reload the list component with the UI component reload coding block. When done, I can close our visual coding window and finally save the page. Boom! There's our news article now listed right in our app. Once this has been configured, we can easily manage our news by using the Content Manager inside Aquro App Manager, and will not need to do any more coding in our app to publish new news. The same concept can be applied to any kind of content that you would like to list and manage in your app.